The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says, if Christ has not been raised from the dead, then we are, of all people, most to be pitied. If Jesus didn't really rise from the dead, then we are, of all people, most to be pitied. In other words, if Christ didn't rise from the dead, then we should all go to Zappelli.com, buy a new Zappelli polo, and go golfing this morning. Like, you are wasting, you like that shout out? You are wasting, like, why in the world have we come here this morning, right? But Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 continues. He says, but Christ did rise from the dead. He did rise from the dead. And here's my summary of the, 10 to 12 verses that follow that, is that his rising from the dead changes everything. Now, Easter's past. You've heard me say that. I'm sure you all remember. You've probably heard that in other places, in other pulpits, in other meditations on Easter, but I want it to resonate in our hearts and minds today. That Paul says that if Christ indeed died, rose from the grave, that it changes everything. But here's the big question, and the question for this morning. How can we be certain of the resurrection? How can we be certain that indeed Christ rose? Well, if you're just joining us, we've been in a series going through the book of Luke. And the main point, or the purpose that Luke writes this gospel story, and even as we come to Easter, the reason that he writes this Easter account is so that we might be certain. The question of certainty has been at the center of even our Easter messages this year. We talked on Palm Sunday that we were certain that he is king. For Good Friday, we talked about the fact that we were certain that he was Savior. And this morning, I want us to think on the fact that we can be certain that he is Lord. So as we've looked at the book of Luke, we understand that his purpose in writing is that we were certain, but how can we be certain? Well, the way that Luke was certain as he wrote is that he interviewed people who had eyewitness accounts of the reality of the things that he wrote about. So when he got to the resurrection, he would have interviewed people who actually witnessed the resurrection. That's pretty cool, isn't it? So he interviews them, and then he writes this gospel so that we too might be certain. And I'm wondering, wouldn't it be great if we could hear one of those interviews? I mean, wouldn't that be cool? So I want you to respond to me, right? Wouldn't it help you this morning to hear a first-hand account of Jesus rising from the dead? Would that help? 6 of you, that's great. Let me ask you this. If indeed you heard that first-hand account that Jesus had risen from the dead, wouldn't that change some things? Maybe for you this morning, wouldn't that change everything? 3 of you, we're getting better. All right. Will one person please respond to this? Are you willing this morning to be open to the fact that an interview like that might even change you? Well, here's good news. You came to the right church this morning. Because, believe it or not, Luke is in the house. He is. I want you to join me in welcoming the gospel writer, Luke, who is here this morning. Luke, why don't you come on up? Yeah, let's welcome him, all right? Incredible, right? That Luke has come. Thanks, Luke. It's good to see you.
Good to be here.
You can have a seat there. And also, with him comes a friend. Howdy, folks. My name is Cleopas. Cleopas. Can you say that with me? Cleopas. Thank you. I'm from a little town outside Jerusalem. It's in the western part of Judea. The western part of Judea called Emmaus. And I'm just so thrilled and tickled pink to be here today. Luke, this great man wrote a great story, and I'm in it. So if you want flowers, if you want to go check it out sometime, it's in this guy's book, Luke 24. You ought to check it out. Luke, you made me look really good in that. I just want to thank you for your good work in that. But anyways, we need to get to the interview, right?
Yes. Well, thank you for being here. Let's welcome Cleopas, everyone. Well, to begin, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with us about your incredible journey from Jerusalem back to your hometown of Emmaus after the resurrection or the crucifixion of Jesus.
Well, yeah, and Luke, it's my pleasure to be here with you all, but especially you today. There is nothing that I can think of that I would be rather doing than telling people throughout time and throughout geography, right, of the reality of my certainty that Jesus is risen from the dead.
Well, first question for you. Can you describe your feelings as you and Josiah walked back to Emmaus after the devastating days around Jesus' crucifixion?
Well, first, good job on my friend's name, Josiah. Not everyone knows Josiah that well. Yeah. To be succinct, how we felt that day. Devastated. Maybe a bit confused. You need to understand that it was just about a year and a half before that day that we met Jesus. Josiah and I heard there was a man in Galilee doing all kinds of miracles and all kinds of crazy good stuff, and we were like, we're intrigued. And then we heard that he was coming to Jerusalem on one of his journeys, and Jerusalem just about 7 miles from the farm. And so we said, we need to get to Jerusalem. And once we got to Jerusalem, we heard Jesus. We heard his teaching. We saw what he did. We were like, we got to give up everything to follow this guy. So, we left the farm. And for the next year and a half, we followed Jesus. When we met him, we heard his teaching, we saw his power, we knew some things. And we thought some more grandiose things. We really thought that he was the one the prophets talked about, the one who would come to redeem the Jews, to redeem our people. And for us, that meant that he's going to deliver us from that hard hand of those Roman, the Roman Empire. He's going to wipe them out. That's what we thought. We thought, oh, this is it. No more slavery to Roman rule, and no more paying taxes to those barbarians. We really thought this was going to be it. So imagine the devastation in that last journey that he made to Jerusalem as we followed him there. He's arrested. He's tortured. He's crucified. I hate to admit it now, but Josiah and I, we hid out, man. We were afraid maybe we'd be next. But after a couple days, when the way seemed clear, we went back to his cronies. I think you all called them the disciples, and told them, look, we're out. We're headed home, going back to the farm. And the confusing part was that while we were there, some of the ladies, they ran into the room and they said that they'd been to the grave and that the stone was rolled away and that it was empty. No offense to you women folk, but sometimes you can get all emotional about lots of things. You may not see things quite the way they really were. So Josiah and I were just like, it's these women folk, right? And so we packed up, says we're out, we're going back home. So we headed back to Emmaus to try to put our overgrown farms back together. I mean, a year and a half is a long time to be gone.
So as you're walking, this guy approaches you along the way. What were your first impressions of him?
Well, Luke, to be honest with you, there were a lot of people on the road that day. I mean, Passover had just finished. It was a crazy weekend. Just a lot of foot traffic going there and back. But this guy, a stranger to us, which is kind of odd to say now, but we really didn't recognize him. We had no idea who he was. He came up, and I guess we looked as depressed as we were, because he kind of walked with us, listened to us complain and jive and do all the things we're doing. And then he just said, well, what's wrong? What's wrong? I stopped immediately in my tracks. I stopped right there. Josiah and him kept on walking, but then they stopped and realized that I had stopped. And they looked back at me, and I said, what's wrong? What's wrong? I said to this man, have you been living under a rock? I think that's what I actually said. When you wrote it in the book, you made it sound a whole lot better. Have you been living under a rock? What's wrong? This one who had come to save us? This one who had come to destroy Rome and to save us? He's crucified. He's dead. So our impression of him?
Yeah, did your impression change? I mean, what changed it?
Well, at first we thought, this guy's a little ditzy, right? A little disillusioned. Kind of one of those guys that sticks his head in the sand. But it did change. At first for the worse, Mr. Luke. He actually, you ready for this? He actually looked at us and said, you fools. I mean, what kind of guy just comes up to some strangers who are all depressed, walking on their way to Emmaus, and starts calling them names? You fools. I think I even said to Josiah, we should ditch this guy, right? He's not good for us. But then it got better. He kept talking. And he started talking like he knew stuff, right? Actually, if I'm being honest, I probably should have known it was Jesus then. But I think I was still a little angry about the whole fool thing going on, right? Anyway, he starts quoting the prophets. And he's doing it in such a way that he made sense of everything. He even made sense of Jesus suffering. He even made sense of Jesus dying. And even in that, there was still this hope in this guy's voice. It was crazy. When he realized that we still didn't get it, because Josiah and I aren't the brightest bulbs in the pack, right? He went back to Moses. And for the next hour, he gave us the whole story of the Bible. Josiah and I went back. We counted over 50 references that he made from that Old Testament that he pulled out from memory just as we were walking along that road. But even more, with every reference, he was weaving a story that pointed to everything that we knew about Jesus. By the way, I think there's a lady in your church. Her name is Paige. She's done the same thing in a class called The Story of Faith. You should take that class if you haven't already. It takes her 15 weeks, took Jesus an hour, but, she ain't Jesus. So that's
I think I have heard some really good reviews about that class.
Yeah, it's already gone. That's
but back to the story. Was that the moment you knew it was Jesus?
Well, you would think so, right? But no, we actually, he was just going on and on and on about all this stuff. We actually had to interrupt him because we got to the farm. Right? So we got to our house, and the dude would have kept on walking, probably kept on talking, but there was something different about him, so we persuaded him, we invited him to come in and spend the night. It was getting dark, wouldn't have been safe on the road. I don't know, there's just something about him that had lifted our spirits, and for one, I really didn't want to let him go. So he did come in, and this is where our friends often get a little wishy-washy, get skeptical. So I'm going to ask you to hang in there with me, even you, Mr. Luke. I mean, it was late. There wasn't much in the house to eat. Obviously, we hadn't been there in a year and a half. But we had some bread and cheese left over from our journey, and so we sat down to eat. And it was just plumb crazy. Realizing that this guy was a biblical genius, Josiah asked him to say grace. Kind of like when the pastor comes over for lunch and you ask him to say the prayer. And as he did, he broke the bread and he handed it to us. I can't tell you exactly what happened. I don't know if it was a little bit of a flashback, because just a couple nights ago, we were in the upper room, the disciples were at the table, we were out and around, and Jesus broke the Passover bread and handed. I don't know if it was kind of flashback to that moment. I don't know if it was, maybe I caught a glimpse of the nail scars in his hand. I don't know what it was. But Mr. Luke, I'm telling you this, I knew right then that was the risen Jesus. That was the risen Jesus. And I remember looking at Josiah just to see if he got it too, or maybe I was kind of losing my mind, right? And our eyes connected, and there was, I don't know, a 10-second gaze. And it all came to light that this was the risen Christ. So we began to turn back to him. Literally, we were both getting out of our seats to go give him a big old hug. And daggone if he wasn't gone. Disappeared, thin air, just like that. He was gone. Josiah and I got up, we ran around the house, we ran outside. Jesus, 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 we believe. We couldn't find him anywhere.
Wow, that had to be crazy.
It was crazy.
But what impact did that have on you to know that Jesus was alive?
That there, Mr. Luke, is a big question. I mean, I can't say that the realization and the impact of knowing Jesus was alive came all at once. Kind of like, we don't have all that electricity stuff, but I think these darn people have dimmer switches, right? It's kind of like a dimmer switch. It was just coming on slowly but surely. And after Josiah and I gave up on our hide-and-seek search for Jesus at the house, we finally sat down together. We started talking. And it was then that we both admitted that when Jesus, because now we know that it was Jesus, was talking with us on the road, man, something burned within us. And we were convinced it wasn't the rice and beans we'd had the night before. It was one of those moments that as you look back and you are looking back, and it all then begins to catch up with you. It all begins to make sense. And then it hit us. Doggone it. Jesus is alive. He's not dead anymore. Jesus was really alive. Our new friend had helped our depression as we walked, but the realization that it was Jesus turned whatever depression we had into joy. Absolute joy. Josiah looked at me and said, man, I don't get it. I don't understand how it happens, this whole resurrection thing, but it's good. And then at the same time, we had the same idea. We did that sometimes, So we got to go back to Jerusalem. And to be honest, I really needed a good night's sleep. It had been a long day. But there was no way I was going to sleep. So I said to Josiah, we got to go now. And I remember the look in Josiah's eyes, a look that says, I know, but do you know what that means? That means another 7-mile walk in the dark, and it's all uphill. And folks, it's even worse than that west hill you have. It was even steeper than that. It was all uphill to get back to Jerusalem. We're going to make that journey tonight. But the more everything sank in, the more excited we got, and the quicker we walked. I do think we set some kind of world record that night getting back to Jerusalem. And while we got there, right, on the way, as we got there, there wasn't many people on the road because it was night, but there was some people on the road, and everybody we met, we went, Jesus is alive! Jesus is alive. I think we passed a couple rocks and we said, Jesus is alive, right? We were so dang excited about the whole thing, right? And even most people looked at us like we were crazy, but some people actually turned around and followed us. So you asked me about the impact of knowing Jesus was alive. I would say it wasn't all at once, but the more we got it, the more it changed everything. We really didn't know what we would find in Jerusalem, but we knew we needed to tell the disciples, and we were hoping that we would see Jesus again.
Maybe a weird question, but I think people will want to know. When you got back to Jerusalem and found the disciples, were you disappointed that they had already known about the risen Jesus?
Yeah, it's funny. Josiah and I rehearsed it all the way back to Jerusalem. Like, how are we going to tell the disciples? Are we going to knock on the door when they open it? We go, surprise! Jesus is alive! Or would we be a bit more nonchalant, like kind of walk in, listen to them gripe for a while, and then kind of say, guess who we saw today? Jesus! It was great. We rehearsed it 800 ways, all up and down and all around. But here's the deal. We got there, knocked on the door, they opened the door, and Peter's across the room. He yells at us, hey! Jesus is risen. He's risen indeed. And I've seen him. Yeah, kind of a letdown. Kind of like, surprise party when you already know the surprise, right? But it didn't last for long because we began to tell our story. And everybody was curious how in the world that we had seen Jesus, eaten with Jesus. And then in the midst of that celebration, are you ready for this? Jesus just showed up. He just appeared. I mean, as quickly and as mysteriously as he disappeared from our table in Emmaus, he showed up in the midst of our celebration. No one let him in. John, to this day, swears that Jesus came right through that wall. I don't know how he did it. I just know after the shock of seeing him again, we all just started celebrating all the more.
Wow, that's incredible. Last question for you here today, and I just want to thank you again for taking the time to sit down and talk with us. Given all you know now, how would you encourage Christians, say, 20 centuries from now, or someone considering Christianity?
Wow. Yeah, not sure, Mr. Luke, I've ever thought about that one, but I guess that's why you're writing this book, right? So that these fine people will get to know. How would I encourage Christians 20 centuries from now? 21st century Christians. Well, first, I guess a lot of people will try to mess with this story. I mean, I know the story, but a lot of people are going to try to mess with it. They're going to try to take the miracles out of it, kind of try to deny that it even ever happened. Heck, they're already doing that in the first century. So I guess I'd encourage anyone who would listen. You're Presbyterians here, right? So I got 3 points. I would encourage anyone who would listen that they can be certain of 3 things. First, you can be certain that Jesus doesn't always do things that make sense. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but you can be certain of it. Jesus doesn't always do things that make sense. I should have, but I didn't see the whole death and resurrection thing coming. I had a way that I thought it should work out. I had a way I thought Jesus should do the things that he was supposed to do. But Jesus knew better. I don't know. It sounds kind of silly, but can we be certain that there'll be uncertainty? Can we be certain that there'll be uncertainty? But listen, this is the most important part. That Jesus will find you in that uncertainty. Just as he found Josiah and I walking on that Emmaus road in our deep depression. So you can be certain that Jesus doesn't always do things that make sense. Secondly, you can be certain that Jesus indeed rose from the grave. And certain that the more you get that dimmer switch, right? The more you get that, the more it will change everything in your life. Josiah and I, we went back to farming. After all this, we went back, cleared the farm, started the farm, did the farm, and we farmed. But farming was different. We realized that farming was what we were made to do, but made to do for the kingdom of God. So we farmed, we formed relationships, we raised our families, we built a church, and we did everything with a greater purpose and a greater hope. Why? Because we knew that Jesus rose from the grave and that the resurrection changes everything. And Mr. Luke, thanks for your time, but here's the third one. I really want you to write about this one, right? You can be certain that Jesus is Lord. You can be certain that Jesus is Lord. Something struck me when we walked into the upper room late that night and heard Peter say, remember, he said, "The Lord has risen indeed, and I've seen him." He didn't say Jesus. He said, "The Lord has risen indeed." And there's a lot in a name. And when Peter said Lord, I was like, yeah, there is nothing that he can't do. When he said Lord, it registered me that there is nothing outside of his control. And therefore, conclusion, There is nothing, absolutely nothing I can't trust him with. Yeah, you can be certain that Jesus doesn't always do the things that make sense. You can even be certain Jesus rose from the grave and that changes everything. But more than anything, I'd tell those 21st century Christians, you can be certain that Jesus is Lord. And Luke, if you don't mind, I'd like to pray for those 21st century Christians.
Please.
Now.